Welcome to European Tech Talks, a podcast brought to you by the European Champions Alliance. The ECA's mission is simple: support the growth and success of European tech companies in the global market. On this podcast, top tech experts and entrepreneurs from all over Europe will share their insights and actionable tips on how to thrive in the European tech scene and beyond. You'll also get the latest updates on the global tech industry and understand how they impact Europe.
So welcome to a new session and episode of the ECA Tech Talks, where the European Champions Alliance talks to entrepreneurs, investors, and experts from the European tech ecosystem about how to raise European champions in technology. And today I'm so happy to speak to Assaf from G+D Ventures. Welcome, Assaf, to ECA Tech Talks. It's been some time that we are preparing this session, and I'm really happy that it's happening today. Hi.
Hi, Andrea. Same here, and thanks for having me. I think what the ECA is doing for the ecosystem in Europe is super important. Happy to be here.
Okay, thank you very much. Fills me with joy that what we do is, adding value. Assaf, we have been, we know each other for quite some time now, and we have been discussing very much around the European ecosystem in tech, especially in cybersecurity. And we have a couple of questions that we want to touch upon. But before that, please, could you present yourself briefly, yourself as Assaf, but also what the G+D Ventures is doing for those who might not know that yet?
Of course. So I'm a partner at an early stage fund called G+D Ventures. We are based in Munich, and we are a fund that is thematically focused on cybersecurity and trust, an area that we collectively label as trust tech. And maybe we can spend some time later in this podcast understanding what that means exactly. We are a financially driven fund, and we are supported by the European Investment Bank, as well as G+D, which is a large corporate based in Munich, Germany, that is one of the largest trust corporations across Europe. They've been active for many years now in multiple areas, from secure payments to secure identities, all the way to cybersecurity. And we leverage their expertise and their network when we make investments. The fund is 6 years old. We've been very fortunate and proud to have already two major exits in the fund. One is Metaco, a company we led the Series A in that was sold a year and a half ago to Ripple Labs in the US for 250 million. That was the amount that was published in online media. And we also recently announced, exited ID Now, which started as a German KYC provider, but through a series of smart acquisitions grew to be a European leader in the space. And maybe we can also talk about that model going forward. Personally, I was born and raised in Israel. This is where I'm coming from originally. I am a computer scientist by background. I started my career as a software programmer. I worked for two startups. And then I joined back then a first-time fund in Tel Aviv called Viola Ventures. Today, one of the largest funds in the country. I spent roughly 10 years in that fund, basically learning the tricks of the trade of venture capital. And then 15 years ago, relocating with the family to Germany, I joined Next 47, which is the corporate venture arm of Siemens. And 6 years ago, I joined G+D Ventures, and I'm a partner at the fund today.
Okay, thank you. So impressive background. And when in Europe, when we talk about cybersecurity, of course, we very often look to the Israeli success in cybersecurity, and you have a large and strong experience in that. So can you tell me a little bit about the Israeli playbook for startups, because it's very often something that European cybersecurity companies look at for best practice. So tell me a little bit about it.
Sure. I mean, the word playbook hints as if there is kind of a secret process that if we can just identify and repeat, then we are successful as well. And this is, of course, not the case. And I think it would be probably better to speak about the unique characteristics of an Israeli startup, and then maybe compare those with the European version of startup founders and startup teams. And so in that context, I would probably highlight three characteristics that are quite common among Israeli startups, and any investor that has spent enough time being exposed to Israeli startup teams would recognize those immediately. These would be high quality teams, high quality ideas, and a very strong focus on the US market as a market to scale it. And let's maybe quickly unpack those three attributes and understand what they mean and why they are the way they are. So starting with high quality teams, I think the average entrepreneurial team in Israel comes across immediately as very high quality. High quality in the sense of being very, very focused, very ambitious, thinking globally, good salesmanship, well-researched markets, high energy, and probably above all, experienced. You ask the people what they did before, what their backgrounds are, and you immediately understand that, again, I'm generalizing, but that's generally true. They can build a high quality product to solve a problem, and they know how to sell that product afterwards to customers. And I don't think that Israelis have something unique, in the DNA that is not existing anywhere else. Humans are humans, and intelligence, creativity, resilience are all qualities that are globally distributed, and any group of people would have that kind of normally distributed group of more intelligent and less intelligent, and it's no difference in Israel. I just think that being a founder, working at a startup in Israeli society is considered to be a highly, not just legitimate, but a sought after career choice. It's something that your mom and dad are proud of. And so there is a self-selection where the good people are being drawn into this industry. And I think that's one of the key reasons why you find so many highly talented people in the Israeli startup ecosystem. Then there is the issue of quality ideas. I think in this context, venture capitalists understand that the investing in category leaders of emerging categories is where you really get the market premiums at the exit. Pick any category in software. And rank the vendors according to their leadership status. The leader in any category reaps a disproportional amount of money when it comes to exits. Number 2 and number 3 are very, very good exits. Maybe not disproportional, but very good exits that any fund would love to have in their portfolio. But then number 4, 5, 6, 7, they very, very quickly become almost insignificant from an investment point of view. And many Israeli companies, especially in the cybersecurity space, have become so far category leaders on a global scale, which says something or tells something about the quality of the ideas. And I think there are two issues here, or two reasons why this is the case and how this came to be. The first one, again, is a bit culturally. I think in the Israeli culture, there is a very strong emphasis on originality, on thinking out of the box, on being unique. It is not a conformative society. It is not cool to be a copycat. But this just explains maybe the mindset, but not the content. I think there is also a process issue here. So Israeli society, many people like to joke that there is 1 degree of separation among Israelis. Everybody knows everyone. It's a very close-knit society, both domestically, by the way, but also internationally. So Israelis that relocate to countries abroad, or say being acquired by Microsoft or Google and then become executives in those companies, they would, like 9 out of 10 would be happy to pick up the phone or answer or reply an email if they are being asked by a fellow Israeli starting a new company what they think about the idea, what they can open door or something like that. And so what you see very commonly among Israeli startups is that even before they write their first line of code, they go through a very, very intensive process of customer discovery, of market validation, in order to make sure that they are working on an idea that is worth solving and has a big pool of budget behind it. And I think those two kind of elements together, the cultural aspect of being original and being part of a very tightly knit society, help to bring those really, really category leadership type of ideas forward. The last thing I would mention about the Israeli model is the very clear, strong focus on the US market. Israel being a country with virtually no domestic market for software products in general, cyber in particular, on the private sector, it is pretty obvious that the US is by far the largest homogeneous market worldwide. Many Israelis speak good English. And so what you see is either shortly before the Series A or shortly after the Series A, the CEO of an Israeli startup would typically relocate to the US, leaving R&D in Israel, which is what Israel does probably best, but moving much closer to the customers and spend much more time on the sales and go-to-market. That's also true from a funding point of view. The pre-seed seed investors tend to be Israeli funds, local funds. In cybersecurity, these tend to be also funds that have a particular thematic focus on cyber, and so they bring their expertise and their networks. But Series A, B onwards, this is where you start to see almost a dominance of typically US based VCs. And I think that combination is actually a very, very good one. The Israeli investors, being the seed investors, are very good at picking the good teams and the good ideas and making sure that they can get to the early traction. The US investors are excellent, probably cannot be easily replaced by their Israeli equivalents in opening doors in the US market, helping with recruiting, helping with messaging, helping with exits. And so these kind of three characteristics, high quality teams, high quality ideas, and laser focus on the US market is very characteristic of Israeli companies.
So you have already touched upon the exit of ID Now a couple of weeks ago, and this has been a big announcement in Germany and a little bit broader in Europe. They also bought a French company a couple of years ago, I remember. And there was also an announcement this week that Google is acquiring an Israeli cyber startup, Wiz, that many people know, for $32 billion. So maybe can we talk a little bit about those two operations? That could be interesting because one is a German going to the US, the other is Israeli going to the US or being acquired, and also the fact that the most exit possibilities and opportunities are.
Yeah, so the Wiz acquisition is phenomenal by any standard. I think it's the largest cyber acquisition ever. Certainly one of the largest, I think, in enterprise software. Wiz is a company that said no to Google offering them, I think, 23 million a year ago, which is an extremely bold move of any company to say no to that big of a check size. I think it's just, yet another proof that a small country being far away from the big markets is absolutely able to be a breeding ground of category leaders that can grow incredibly big. And I think ID Now, these are not, even the same scale of an exit. And I think in general, I think European enterprise software exits above 1 billion, one could count on one hand. This is still not something we come across very frequently in Europe. I believe it will change, but there is a way to get there. And I think that cybersecurity is a particular area where the Israeli startup ecosystem has been able to show that it's producing consistently a series of very large exits, disproportional exits, category leaders in multiple categories. And there is many more actually in the pipeline. And many people are asking, why is this the case? And I think it's fairly common by now to recognize that the Israeli military is playing a huge pivotal role there. But I think most people don't really understand why this is the case. And I think it's worth spending maybe a minute on that. Like what's in the Israeli military service that contributes to this disproportional success in cyber? And I think that one needs to keep in mind that military service in Israel is mandatory for men and women. Everybody simply goes through this. Those who choose not to do that, it is possible. But again, from a social point of view, it is not a very acceptable move. It was very much unacceptable maybe 20 years ago. Today, more and more people are choosing that path. But still, by and large, the vast majority of Israelis go through military service. And the Israeli military is, first of all, a world-class aptitude assessment center. So when you turn 16 or so, still, at high school, you are starting to get invited to a series of exams, tests, both physically and medically, but also and mainly intellectually, to try and profile what would be the best role for you in the military. Looking at the full span, the full spectrum from the fighting units all the way to office work. And the Israeli military, because it's assessing at scale, this is a big data play for 70 plus years, by now tens of millions of soldiers. You can imagine how good it got into profiling and matching people to the right role.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing that the Israeli military is very good at is it is a world-class training center. So for most, especially cyber programs, you go through a training school that could start even before you get recruited. And this is something that lasts months to over a year at a very, very focused kind of, early morning to late night type of studying, a bit of a military style of, this is not, leisure academia, but you go from 0 to 100 very, very quickly, and you're surrounded by very, very competent and capable people. And the last thing I would say about the Israeli military is that it is a world-class factory of startups that needs to develop new innovative solutions to emerging challenges under an extreme time pressure in a context which is almost an existential threat. And cybersecurity, being the modern warfare, is an area that Israel simply had to develop capabilities, both on the offense and on the defense. And so every year, you get literally thousands of extremely highly skilled, trained people completing their military service, typically after 3 years for men, 2 years for women. And they're still young. They are in their early 20s. And so they go, to the private market. And then, as we said before, the choice of doing the startup thing is an absolutely viable career choice. So you have the best of the best chosen for the cyber type of roles, getting released out of military service and continuing to do this in civilian life.
Yeah, so it's interesting because I had a discussion, with Cody Barrow, who is the CEO of Eclectic IQ, who's an American entrepreneur, but running his startup in the Netherlands. And he told me it's not the same story, but that also he was talking about the cybersecurity pipeline, I think, in the US. So people coming out of the military, a little bit, it's not the same because it's a totally different story, but you have highly trained people coming out of those ecosystems that then go into the private sector and can apply all of their knowledge and all of the experience here. So this is certainly a good transition to my next question, because as you have now been in Europe for over 10 years and you live here, you work here as an investor, and so you see what is happening in Europe, how the ecosystem in Europe is shaping, and how it works. So what are the biggest differences that you see between Europe and Israel? And for the moment, we don't have this kind of pipeline, I would say, in Europe, gladly. But what are the biggest differences that you see?
Yeah. So I remember being very surprised coming over to Europe almost 15 years ago and starting, to invest and getting more exposure to European startup ecosystems, initially in Germany and then in other countries in Europe. I think it might be useful actually to consider the three attributes that are characteristic of Israeli startups and try to kind of honestly assess them or evaluate them in the context of the European ecosystem. So we talked about quality teams, quality ideas, and scalable markets, which are really the basic ingredients of every startup in any field and in any region. When it comes to teams, I remember I was really surprised by how young European entrepreneurs are, on average, usually coming out of academia, either directly or maybe after spending 2-3 years as, a consultancy gig, and then doing the startup thing, but still lacking quite a bit of hands-on experience, either technical or commercial. And I remember I did my MBA in France at the INSEAD. And I remember that all the Israelis in my promotion were thinking about, after what to do after the MBA. They wanted to go to tech. Almost all the Europeans wanted to either work at McKinsey, BCG, or to be investment bankers. That alone, right, this career choice, entrepreneurship as a career choice, is something that I think historically in Europe was not there. It is not something that mom and dad are being proud of, right? The European mom and dad want their children to have what they think of as a safe job. and startups are perceived as very, very risky. And I think it's a huge element, cultural element in European entrepreneurship. This is, of course, changing these days. The transition takes time and is still very much felt. When it comes to ideas, I can only judge by the pipeline of ideas that I've been personally witnessing back at the Siemens days, at Next 47, and now at G+D Ventures, where there's just too many European startups that focus on their local regions. So we do this in France, we do this in Germany or in the DACH region, but they don't think globally or at least European-wide.
From the start.
And I think that also there are just too many Me Too ideas, too many copycat ideas. And sometimes, entrepreneurs would say this, like, here's a company that raised so and so much money in the US, and we want to do the same in Europe. Now, copycatting is absolutely a viable and legitimate innovation strategy. I'm not saying anything against it, but by doing this, by making this choice, you are already positioning yourself to be, number 5, number 10, or whatever in a new emerging category. And so for investors, that means a significantly lower exit potential. You just have to acknowledge this basic truth. So we talked about teams, we talked about ideas, and market focus. To me, that was probably the biggest shock, the biggest learning. It sounds almost trivial by now, but I thought that Europe is a big market, but it's not, because it is comprised of 30 plus countries. Each of those countries has a different language, a different culture, different local networks of distribution. And crossing, from Germany to France is oftentimes more difficult than crossing from the US to the UK. And I think scalability is a major issue in Europe. And not only that, but I was also surprised by how closed the potential buyers in Europe are, not just to start up products, not really being open-minded to experiment with them or even take a call from a startup. I also noticed that for me as a VC, when I try to kind of expand my network of experts and speak to the market in order to understand where their priorities are, even for me, it's super difficult to get access to professional buyers. Whereas in the US, there is much more open-mindedness, much more tolerance towards risks, more budget allocated to experiment with new stuff. And I think that really is holding back a lot of good innovations coming out of Europe, trying to address European potential customers and facing, closed doors. It's very frustrating.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that, especially in Germany and also in France, is that, the risk averseness is something that we talk a lot about at the buyers, and the questions that we ask ourselves. And it's part of the next question also is, okay, now that we know that, and, we have this saying, no one has ever been fired for choosing IBM, that's the old sentence that we always take out of our bag. So I think the question is, and this is something that we try to do at the ECA, right, is to change those mindsets and to make people a little bit more open. And the question is, how long will it take for us to achieve this, and how can we do it? So from your perspective, what do you think that European entrepreneurs, the European ecosystem, European investors, what can we do? What are a couple of things that we could do to change that and to be a little bit more open and to make it easier? Because, of course, going from one country into the other in Europe is super, super hard. We know that. And I think it's always a question between what you said, think big and think European from the very start, and then the capacity of the execution capacity, because a lot of things for me in international expansion are a question of execution. Are you a good entrepreneur? Do you know how to go into another country? Because it's not easy, but it's not rocket science either. There's a lot of project management, there's a lot of openness that you need to have, but from your point of view and what you have seen also in your companies, what do we need to improve? What do we need to work on?
I think a lot about this question, and I think, so first of all, I'm refusing to succumb to a fatalistic type of thinking that Europe can't innovate. I remember that there was, after the Draghi report on innovation in Europe, competitiveness of Europe, there was an article that was published at the Financial Times by a journalist that I follow, and the title of the article was "Europe will never catch up with the US." So I'm not sure I agree with this fatalistic thinking. And I also don't think that I would agree with what many people in Europe think in response to realizing that Europe has a problem, that the solution is to throw more money at the problem and asking, the government or the EU to pour more innovation funding either on investors or on startups. I don't think this is the right solution, and we can talk about why that is the case. I think why it's not, going to help. I think the key is to stop thinking about how can we do what the US is doing here in Europe, and instead try to understand and recognize what are the key assets and core competencies that we have in Europe that we can leverage on and build our own playbook, our own version of a European startup. And it will be different than a US one. Just as the Israeli startup model is different from the Israeli, just as the Saudi or the Emirati innovation strategies are different from those in Taiwan or Thailand, every country or region needs to figure out what's the kind of core asset in their own domain, instead of trying to copycat others. And so I think it is therefore useful to ask or rephrase the question as, what are the assets in Europe? And I think there are several. The first one that comes to mind is the economic fabric. If you read the 10K reports, publicly stock market, publicly traded companies in the US in cyber, you read their 10K reports, you see that almost all of them focus on the enterprise market, and oftentimes on the upper end of the enterprise market, Fortune 100, Fortune 500, which of course is incredibly appealing. I mean, these are huge budgets. The products are extremely sticky because there's a lot of customization and integration. So it's very difficult to get in, but once you're in, very difficult to replace you and move you out. But Europe has a different economic structure. If you look at the global Fortune 500 list of the 500 largest companies worldwide, Europe is taking less than a quarter of that list. And if you take out the UK and Switzerland, that's probably going down to 15% or so. So we don't have that many enterprises. This is why if you want to focus on enterprise, or at least the upper end, you have to go to the US probably. But Europe does have something which is kind of unique, which is that middle layer that is in many, many countries within Europe, the basis, the economic basis of the economy. These are mid-sized companies, somewhere between, 250 employees to a couple of thousands. They don't have the same budgets as a Citibank or a Goldman Sachs, but they have different requirements. If you want to address those, maybe you have to have a different pricing. Maybe you want to have a different go-to-market strategy and do this more with partners and system integrators and not sell directly. Maybe you want the product to be more suitable to integrate with the right landscape of IT that is available in the mid-sized companies in Europe that is different maybe in the US. You want to show out-of-the-box value of your product almost immediately without a lot of customization and integration. So maybe the product is less sophisticated, but delivers value more quickly. And so when you think about it like this, you can actually build highly scalable startups that are able to find a lot of traction within Europe without trying to copycat the US or the Israeli playbook. And so Personio, which is an enterprise HR software, is actually having most of its customers exactly in that layer, middle layer, and they're incredibly successful. We've made recently an investment in a company called Blockbrain, which operates today in a very crowded space of AI or Gen AI governance and enterprise Gen AI. But they designed their product to fit the mid-sized companies in Europe, exactly across the parameters I've outlined earlier. And they are today the largest, the fastest growing company in our portfolio. So this is an absolutely doable strategy that I think is often overlooked. Another area that I think is very European is regulation. When Americans talk about regulation, they oftentimes talk about it in negative terms. They view regulation as red tape, as an innovation, or in general as a business suffocating type of activity that governments tend to do. And I agree to some extent. I mean, regulation can be annoying and sometimes overly done. I mean, look at, cookies in Europe, which is good intention gone extremely bad, and we all kind of click to remove this to do our okay without even reading the text. But this is all because of just poorly designed regulation. There is no shortage of those examples, but regulation is one of the few forces that literally forces companies to allocate budgets and do things. And because Europe so much likes to regulate, I think thinking as startups about what is the upcoming regulation and how can I build a product that helps companies to be more compliant with regulation, you by definition have this tailwind that pushes you forward thanks to regulation. And this could be further leveraged. And ID Now, which we mentioned earlier, a portfolio company of ours that we've exited, was doing exactly that. There was an emerging regulation around KYC that banks had to do. It was a very prescriptive regulation of how KYC should be done. And ID Now was there at the right time and the right place in order to allow banks, to offer banks a platform to do exactly that. And thanks to regulation, they were able to scale very quickly.
And then what you can see is that some of those regulations that are tested, implemented in Europe are exported to other regions of the world. And if you then say in cybersecurity, you're the European leader on this kind of regulation, you have a very good standpoint because might it be, adaptation of some of those regulations in California or elsewhere is really something that can help those companies to get the traction also outside the European market.
That's exactly right. And I think that, when we talk about cyber, and this is why we at GD Ventures decided to reframe or reword the term cyber to trust tech. I think if I'm honest with myself, the next network security, cybersecurity company is unlikely to come out of Europe going forward. But the next risk assessment, privacy, identity management category leader can absolutely come out of Europe because these trust-related issues, not warfare type of security, but trust-related issues, is very much a European play. And I think, this is where Europe enjoys a competitive advantage.
So thank you for all of those insights and the view that you have on this ecosystem, which is very much differentiated because you live here for a long time, but you also know the Israeli market very, very well. Tell me, Assaf, how optimistic are you about Europe being able to catch up or, get on the same level? I don't know, even the catch up word is somehow a little bit biased, of course. And I think if we talk about the catching up each time, we always have the impression that we are behind. And I mean, we have to face it also, but I think turning this, as you said, the narrative around in how can we strengthen and not how can we catch up is maybe one thing that we can do. But so what is your vision for the next, let's say 5, 10, 15 years on Europe on the global scale of cybersecurity? Give us some hope.
If I wasn't optimistic, I would probably not do what I'm doing. And I think that innovation at the country or a regional level is a process on a timeline. And some countries or regions started earlier than others. Some had certain advantages that others did not enjoy. And I think Europe as a whole is transitioning from, the childhood phase to adolescence. If you look at the number and type of exits and the scope of exits, if you look at, the number of investors, the level of sophistication and specialization of investors in Europe, and the type of ideas that are starting to pop up, I think Europe is absolutely on the way to become a global leader. I agree with you that the US type of KPIs should not be the metric through which, or the lens through which we analyze whether Europe is successful or not. Europe should do what is right and appropriate for Europe. So we talked about, the trust or trust tech kind of positioning that Europe is carving for itself, which is different from the kind of pure hardcore cyber of Israel or, the big kind of, blow up markets that you find in the US. I think there's also a huge generational change whose perception of what is safe, what is stable, what is risk is changing. Replacing maybe more old-fashioned CISOs and IT managers on the buyer side, being more open-minded going forward. And on the entrepreneurial side, people who can speak better English, who've been around, who traveled around, who've seen the world, who are not afraid of selling beyond their kind of local And you see this in the pipeline, you see this in the Series A's and B's across Europe, that the level of quality of teams, of ideas is just on an ever increasing trend. So I'm absolutely optimistic, and I think it's absolutely doable. And I will finish with a very concrete example. We mentioned Metaco, which is our second exit so far in the portfolio. The company started in Switzerland, in Lausanne, doing a crypto custody, how to securely store cryptocurrencies. That was in 2017, 2018 when they started. And from day one, Adrian, the founder CEO, thought about positioning his company and his technology to be global from day one. And so he brought to the cap table us from Germany and Standard Chartered Bank from Singapore, and American investors and local Swiss investors. And he struck a partnership with Avaloq, which is a huge banking software company that helped Adrian and his team to get access to banks around the world. And they started to sell and generate traction, not just in Switzerland, not just in the DACH region, but globally. And they grew to become a fantastic success story that I think is absolutely replicable. And with that, I finish. I think what's proven to be a very, very virtuous cycle in Israel, and I'm hoping that we'll see more and more of this in Europe as well, is the emergence of role models, of entrepreneurs like Adrian, starting in Europe, becoming category leaders that can tell the story and show that these things are absolutely doable and possible. So whoever is debating, at the beginning of their careers, whether to do the startup thing, they can show that it is absolutely doable, no matter where you sit.
Yeah. And I think, and we already talked about it, and the idea of the playbook, is something that is, running through my mind. And I think that we don't know those stories enough in Europe. We don't talk about them enough. We don't highlight them enough because we have some kind of, low level, under the radar kind of, let's say, culture. And I think we don't have to change ourselves completely, but I think we should highlight those stories much more to inspire other entrepreneurs, of course, and to learn from them. Really, the idea of highlighting more of those stories is something that we would like to do in this podcast. So we're happy to talk to them, for example, to that they tell us what they do, how they do it. And I mean, some entrepreneurs create bigger successes than others, and others consolidate, and others just build a great company. So I think there are so many ways how to shape this, and we're happy at the ECA to talk about those topics and to show them to the world. So Assaf, thank you very much. I think we have touched on so many things that are interesting and will be great insights for people listening to this episode. So thank you very much for your time and for your dedication, and also for supporting us. So thank you very much, and speak to you soon.
Thank you very much, Andrea. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of European Tech Talks until the end. If you enjoyed it, please leave us a 5-star rating and share it with your friends and colleagues. This will help increase our visibility on the podcast platforms. And don't forget to subscribe to receive our latest episodes. Before you go, have you considered joining the European Champions Alliance? As a member, you will have access to a network of European companies and industry experts, exclusive publications on industry-specific topics, invitations to members-only events, and support and advice on your pan-European expansion plans. If you're interested, please visit our website at european-champions.org or reach out to us on LinkedIn. See you in the next episode.